Hello everybody, welcome to Talking Tendons podcast. My name is Peter Meliaris, I'm a researcher at Monash University. I had a great time recently overseas in the UK delivering some courses and also at a conference in Denmark. And I'm back and I'm glad to say I didn't have COVID, but I did come into contact with lots of people who had COVID, which I'm finding really interesting. Perhaps the vaccine is actually working for me. Something's working. I've also got some courses coming up, Mastering Lower Limb Tendinopathy courses in Melbourne on early June, and in Darwin, which I'm really looking forward to in early July. Just wanted to mention that. So today in Talking Tendons podcast, I'm going to be talking about wait and see interventions for Achilles tendinopathy. One of the really interesting and important questions that we need to answer is this treatment that we're offering people any better than just doing nothing at all, wait and see? The recent Dutch guideline on Achilles tendinopathy that was led by Robert Jan de Vos and his team in the Netherlands, they have some recommendations about wait and see. What we should inform our patients, and basically it goes a little something like this, that we should inform people that if you have Achilles tendinopathy, there's going to be limited improvements over time compared to wait and see policy, especially in the short term. And that's based on two studies, and I just wanted to draw people's attention to them because they are quite useful. If you've got patients, you might want to and they ask you about wait and see, you might want to provide this evidence to them, or at least a summary of it. But there are two studies. There's one by Horstmann that was published in 2013, and there's one by Rompe that was published in 2007. And they're both comparing wait and see to exercise for midportion Achilles tendinopathy. So why is wait and see comparison important? Well, it's important because it's controlling for things like natural history, and that is, will this condition just get better if I do nothing at all? And some people do want to take that chance and may want to think, I'm just going to let this go. And I think all of us have done that at some point, had some sort of painful condition and thought, you know what, it's going to go away. And a lot of the time it does go away. But what we're finding with Achilles tendinopathy is that it may not go away. And that's certainly the recommendation from this Dutch guideline. So it's an important question to answer for patients. Because they'll often wonder, and they'll often think, can I just let this go? Now, an important thing to consider is what are the populations in these studies. And like most studies, they will recruit people who have had the pain for a certain amount of time. So we don't know about the acute or the sort of short-term pain in the mid-portion Achilles, how likely that is to go away by itself. It may be that it does, and I'm sure it does for many people, but when you've had it for a few weeks, both of these studies tend to suggest that it's not going to go away by itself. It's at least in the short term. In the first, I think the outcomes are up to 4 months for the Rompe study, and in the other study by Horstmann, I think they might be 12 weeks. Yes, 12 weeks, so it's a bit shorter. So, so it's not going to go away in the short term. If you've got a chronic Achilles mid-portion problem, you may want to do something about it. And what they show in both of these studies is that compared to, say, exercise, there's not as much benefit. In fact, they've still got pretty moderate disability, whereas the people who do the exercise over a number of weeks tend to improve and have substantial improvements that are better between group compared to the wait and see after that exercise. Okay, so that's a really good thing to be able to educate your patients about if they're asking. And it's good evidence that our exercise interventions are worthwhile in this context for this population. Now, one thing I did want to also mention during this podcast briefly is that you do need to make clear what wait and see is. So when you're reading these studies, wait and see may sound like it's quite standardized. You just wait and you see what happens over time, but actually there's a bit more to it than that. In the Rompe study, they actually provided, they saw an orthopaedic surgeon, and the orthopaedic surgeon provided training modification advice, implementation of stretching advice, ergonomic advice. So there was a fair bit of advice there, and also advice about taking anti-inflammatories and pain medications if needed. So that's important to bear in mind. The Horstmann study was slightly different. In their study, wait and see was more of wait and see. So basically they got them to fill out an activity or training log, and that was it. Okay, so they basically didn't give them any advice or anything like that. So wait and see, in summary, does seem to be less effective than doing exercise. Both the studies used eccentric exercise as the comparator. There's also a third arm. If you read the studies, you'll see there's a third arm, which is vibration training for the Horstmann study and shockwave for the Rompe study. I'll link both of these studies to the actual notes for this podcast, so you'll have both of those and you can read them. I recommend you have a look at them yourself. And just lastly, the other thing we can ask ourselves is, what about bias with a wait and see intervention? And that's one of the things that it has been criticised for. So when you're doing a wait and see intervention, you're generally not able to blind the participants because they know they're not receiving anything, and that might therefore influence the outcomes, and also the people that are receiving a treatment know that there's another group who's not, and that might influence their outcomes. So there certainly is bias from that, and it's different to, say, a placebo-controlled trial where you might blind participants to if they're getting the actual intervention or not. But it's more of a pragmatic trial approach to be thinking about giving a wait and see and asking that very pragmatic question of what will be the difference for doing nothing at all. So it is a good question to answer. And as I say, for Achilles tendons, if you do have patients that have Achilles tendinopathy and they're asking what will happen if I've got this chronic Achilles tendon, I've had it for months, and will it go away by itself? The answer is probably not in the short term. Excellent. Thank you very much for listening to that brief podcast. As I say, I'll link the DeVos management guidelines, because that's a really good read as well. All 291 pages, I believe, of that guideline. I'll link all those to this podcast. Thank you very much for listening. See you next time.